Taking a step back, you know that relatability and motivation coexist, and you know that you can't have one without the other one now. You know that. You understand the importance of being relatable, because if you are a relatable person and you understand what makes you relatable, well, other people can relate to you and you're attracting your audience. You can build on that. And not only that, it's going to give you the motivation you need to continue this journey, to keep going, spreading your wings and climbing up to the top, achieving your goals and ambitions. And by doing that, you need motivation. And how do you keep it? By knowing what makes you relatable. And now, what you've been waiting for. How do you know what makes you relatable? The big question. How do you know what makes you a relatable person? Well, there's a couple of ways, and I'm going to show you. So, how do you know what makes you relatable? To be motivated? To keep this journey going? Well, you do this by making a relatability list. So, what's a relatability list? How do you make a relatability list, you may ask? Well, here's how you do it. Before we create a relatability list, I want to remind you what we find relatable as human beings. Well, we find many things relatable. From listening to that favorite song of yours all the way through to going to maybe your favorite art gallery staring at some paintings. Maybe watching a video and something that happens and it reminds you of something that's happened in the past. Or maybe you've walked into a chocolate factory or a chocolate shop and that smell reminds you of when your grandma used to buy you your favorite chocolate. Well, there's many things that we find relatable, and a lot of those things are tied to our senses, from smell to taste to touch to texture to things that happen in front of our eyes or things that we hear. When we relate to something, we relate to it, and sometimes we can't even help it. Sometimes we relate to it because it reminds us of something in the past, or sometimes we relate to it because it opens up a new pathway within ourselves and it actually inspires us to want to do it. Or maybe, just maybe, you feel like it's relatable, but you're not really too sure. Sometimes that can happen too. But in terms of bringing that up, and why I brought it up is because this is what you look for. You look for things that you find relatable, and this is how you can discover what makes you a relatable person. This is how you do it. I've got a little scenario for you. Imagine me holding a teacup that your grandma used to have. And let's just say you had it one day and you accidentally dropped it and it broke. I pull out that same teacup. Are you relating to the teacup because the teacup has a grandma? Or are you relating to the teacup because your grandma had the same teacup? Of course, the teacup doesn't have a grandma, you have a grandma. When we relate to something, it's because it's within inside of ourselves. We find many things relatable, and going back to that scenario, I'm going to give you another one. I want you to think about all of these scenarios. I'm going to give you more actually. Think about your favorite song and what it reminds you of. Whether it's Harry Styles singing and you're finding it relatable, it's not because it's actually got nothing to do with Harry Styles. He's singing and it's all coming through him, but in matter of fact, it's reminding you of your past love. When we relate to something, it's because it's within inside of ourselves. It's happened either in the past or it's something we want to happen. It's more or less actually has nothing to do with what triggers that memory or makes us feel that way. It's because it's within us. That is why we therefore relate to something. And when we relate to it, whether it's sad, good, happy, disturbing, or it might trigger something, it's still relatability. You can relate to sad stories. You can relate to soft news, hard news. You could relate to happy things. You could relate to sad things. Things happening. It's all relatable. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because it's important for you to know. Because we are about to make a relatability list. How do we make a relatability list? Well, how do we make a relatability list? Well, here we go. To make a relatability list, you need to do this with a partner. You could do it with your mom, your dad, your family members, maybe a friend nearby, or, anybody. You can create a relatability list by teaming up with someone and doing it. So this is what you do. When you're about to make a relatability list, you must list the things you find relatable. I find my pets relatable. I find smells relatable. Maybe it's strawberries. strawberries, because maybe you grew up on a strawberry farm. You also find other content creators relatable because you are now a content creator. Maybe you find certain TV shows relatable, or maybe you find more music relatable. These are all the different types of things that you can find relatable. But in order for you to make a relatability list, you need to do this activity. Doing this activity that I'm going to teach you is crucial to making a relatability list. I want you to find a partner, whether it's your mom, your dad, sister, siblings, it could be your grandparents, it could be a friend, it could be anybody. It could even be me if you want to do this with me, that's totally fine. Send me a message. But doing this activity is how you find the answer to what makes you relatable. I want you to get a pen and paper and pick a partner, whoever it may be, and sit down with them and ask them what they find relatable about you. As they mention a couple of things, write it down. If they say to you, oh, why are we doing this? Or, oh, this is a bit weird, just go, no, it's fine. I'm going to do it to you and I'm going to tell you why we did it. And if you explain it that way, you're more likely to be successful to do it with someone. Once they've finished, maybe they've said 5 things. Maybe just say, list 5 things that you find relatable about me. Whatever it may be, tell them it's okay. Say anything. None of it will be silly. You want to make them comfortable when they do this because you want them to tell you the truth. You list those 5 things. I find your confidence relatable. I find what you do relatable. I find the outfits and the fashion you pick relatable. When you know what they find relatable about you, it's your turn. Once they've finished, you go, okay, I'm going to now tell you what I find relatable about you. And then you tell them what you find relatable about them. If it's 5 things, then you say what you find relatable about them. I find the way you look relatable. I find the way you storytell relatable. I find your passion relatable. I actually find your pain relatable. I can relate to some of the things you've been through. It doesn't all have to be good things. Tell the truth. Be honest. And then finish. And once you've done that, well, the 5 things that they've said and the 5 things that you've said become 10 things. Turns into your relatability list. That is how you get real life testimonials. Now you know how to create a relatability list. You do it by doing that activity. And the more people you do that with, the more information you learn. The longer and bigger your list grows. By focusing on the 10% of who you are, you ignore the 90% of who you're not. By focusing on the 10% of who you are, you ignore the 90% of who you're not. Think about it. This is how you're going to remind yourself of what makes you a relatable person. And it's an interesting experience, trust me. Sometimes when I get out my relatability list and I read all of these things, it's an interesting one-on-one process with yourself. But it keeps you on the right track. It's important to know what makes you relatable, and it's important to ask others what they find relatable about you. You know why? Because not only will your relatability list remind you and give you the motivation that you need to continue this journey, but it is also secretly content. You could turn all of that into content. Being relatable doesn't mean you just have to use it for that reason. You could also use it to be inspired. You could add all of those things to your content Bible. And this is how you focus on the 10% of who you are and not worry about the 90% of things that just don't matter. And what I mean by that is the distractions, what people say. Maybe you received a negative comment or a message from someone who said that, I don't really understand what you're doing, why are you doing it? And it may impact you. Or just like that other thing, maybe it's been a really long day and you're tired and you're just, you're overthinking it. Keep things simple. If you're in a dark space or you forget how to be relatable, or maybe you just like motivation, you get out your relatability list. Focus on the 10%. Don't worry about the 90%. Keep going. When thoughts become uncontrollable and you feel like you're stuck or on pause, get out your relatability list. By understanding how we feel and our perspectives, keeping track of what's going on in our minds, it's going to help. How do you stay consistent on social media? Well, you do it by creating a relatability list. Good luck.